Stop hitting yourself! Stop hitting yourself! Stop hitting yourself!
So just yesterday, we got ourselves Purrely in Master Duel, which is a deck list known to summon out a gigantic boss monster that's completely immune to all card effects and is really goddamn hard to deal with. We also just got Kaiju in the game, a deck known to zone lock you out of being able to play the game at all, and it's about to get a Rise Heart, which is literally a dimension shifter on legs, a really irritating boss monster that is quite hard to get rid of. Unless, of course, you're playing the main counters to both of these archetypes. Kaijus. Now, what if Konami just released an archetype that was designed specifically for playing with Kaijus? So here's today's deck list. Now just a reminder before I get to the deck list, if you guys are enjoying today's video and want to see more content just like this in the future, especially if you're a returning viewer, there's apparently about 35% of who are watching this or even subscribed to the channel, meaning 65% of you haven't even subscribed yet. So if you guys are enjoying this content and want to see more videos just like this in the future or more deck lists from me in the future, remember to leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to the channel down below. Alright, let's jump into this deck list. So today's deck list is obviously going to be Mikanko, a ritual deck list based around a bunch of monsters with 0 attack that like to use equip spells. Its entire goal is to swing into your opponent's monsters with 0 attack and make them burn themselves to death via battle damage they receive instead. So it's a very weird deck, and thankfully it's not the most expensive deck out there, considering the actual main deck itself does contain a few ultra rares, but the actual extra deck isn't required. You do not need an extra deck for this deck. The only cards I was kind of using was the IP and the Knightmare, which are cards that most people have by now. Everything else is just sort of not that required, so if you don't have any in here, don't worry about it. You can replace it with whatever you feel like, just so you have enough resources for your pot of extravagances, because this deck really doesn't actually require an extra. And to continue with its theme of being one of the more weirder decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is one of the very few decks in the game that actually wants to go second. This deck loves the battle phase. It wants to swing into your opponent's monsters, so it wants you to have that going second battle phase, swing into whatever your opponent has, normally going to be lava golems and kaijus of course, being very high statted monsters, and swinging into them with 0 attack monsters, and just reflecting a bunch of battle damage straight back at your opponent, normally leading to an OTK. So we'll start off with your main deck monsters first, starting with your sword. This card, basically, if this card is not equipped with an equipped card, you take no damage from battles involving this card. If this card is equipped with an equipped card, it cannot be destroyed battle and your opponent takes any battle damage you would have taken from battles involving this card. This is a shared effect that is on the same effect that both of your other Mikankos also have. Alright. Then it has a nice little effect where if an equipped card becomes equipped to this card, you can add one Mikanko equipped spell from your deck to your hand. You can only use the effect once per turn. So this is your main searcher for some of your other Mikanko equipped spells, which you'll see very actively throughout the gameplay. Alright, then we have your mirror. This one we're only playing at 1 copy because it's not all that useful. It doesn't help the OTK playstyle of the deck list. You normally summon this card if you think you're not going to be able to OTK your opponent, because it has a nice little effect to use during your opponent's turn, where if it has an equipped card attached to it, as a quick effect, you can just yoink one of your opponent's monsters and take control of it. So it's basically only usable during your opponent's turn, so you only want one of it for if you are forced to go first, or if you don't think you can OTK your opponent, you can summon this out for a bit of disruption during their turn. Alright, then we have your other main deck monster, your Duel. This card, basically, while you control an equipped card and your opponent cannot target Mikanko cards you control with card effects, which is very useful, because you'll notice it just says, cannot target Mikanko cards, not just Mikanko monsters. So this thing makes all your monsters immune, makes all your back row immune to any sort of targeting effects. So if you're up against a sort of heavy target deck, so something like Runick for example, they just can't hit any of your stuff, and you're just completely safe to just do whatever you goddamn feel like. Also, if either player equips an equipped card to this card, you can add your trap card from your deck to your hand, which is going to be your Rivalry. Again, we're only playing this at 1 copy because very similar to the mirror over here, it doesn't help the OTK playstyle of the deck, and you're generally only grabbing this card just because you can, and if the turn does happen to pass back to you, or you make it so that you can't OTK your opponent, you have to wait a turn or whatever, you have this card in the field, which basically just lets you equip spells from your deck straight to your opponent's monsters, which can be very useful to do things like equip them with your Reflection, which yoinks one of your opponent's monsters, or equip them with a double-edged sword if they try to swing into you to just nuke your opponent for 1 billion damage. Next up, we have your ritual monster, Ohime. This card basically can be ritual summoned using Mikanko Kagura. You don't need to worry about that at all, because you're not even using a ritual spell in this deck list. You'll be summoning this card out using the quick play spell, which can basically summon out any of your Mikankos without having to worry about their summoning conditions. So you just ignore the fact this thing needs ritual requirements or a ritual spell card. Ignore all of that, you're going to summon it using a quick play spell instead. Alright, cannot be destroyed battle. Also, your opponent takes any battle damage you would have taken from battles involving this card. You can use each of the following effects once per turn. You can reveal this card in your hand, add one Mikanko card from your deck to your hand except itself, then discard one card. Quick effects, you can target one equipped spell in your graveyard, equip it to an appropriate monster on the field. So generally the main use of this card is you'll activate it, search for the quick play spell, use the quick play spell, summon this card from your hand, then you can use this effect, or use the quick play spell's effect in the graveyard to banish it, which then use a Foolish Barrel effect of sending one of your Mikanko cards from your deck straight to the graveyard, which can then, because this thing has the quick effect to grab one of your equipped spells in the graveyard and equip it, this thing can then take those cards in the graveyard and equip them to your monsters. Or you can use things like your Fire over here, which can then revive cards from your graveyard, or you can use this card in your graveyard to then revive cards from your graveyard back to your field. So there's a lot of reviving going on in this deck list, so it does like the Foolish Barrel effect from this monster, making this thing a very strong searcher for the list. And the final Mikanko card we haven't spoken about yet is going to be Water. This thing can be equipped to any monster, and that monster cannot be destroyed by card effects. During your main phase, you can spiral summon a Mikanko monster from your hand or deck with a different original name than the equipped monster, and if you do, equip with this card. Then return that monster that was previously equipped with this card to the hand. You can use this effect once per turn. Now keep in mind, this thing can target any monster, including your opponent's monsters, which leads to some pretty cool strategies with this deck list. For example, if your opponent has a bunch of monsters on the field, you can activate a Lava Golem, tributing off 2 of their monsters, then you can use this thing, targeting the Lava Golem, to then bounce the Lava Golem back to your hand to summon out a Mikanko monster from your deck list, meaning you can use the Lava Golem on future turns to remove even more monsters, generating quite a bit of value. And this is also one of the main searches for the deck list, which is why we're playing 3 of it. Now as for the rest of the deck list, there's obviously a bunch of other little bonus effects and stuff I've missed on some of the cards, so if you guys want to read through them, I highly suggest you do so. You'll see most of the interactions during the gameplay anyway, but generally, I didn't want to bore you guys too much, so let's just jump into some of the gameplay and show off how this deck list can do. Alright, so I thought I'd start off today's replays with an absolute banger. If you guys are a hater of some of the more cringier playstyles behind Labrynth, more notably the virus cards, you're going to love this replay. As this guy, he was a Labrynth player and he used one of the virus cards and still proceeded to get his ass absolutely blasted. So yeah, hope you enjoy this one. It's definitely my favourite of the bunch I recorded today, so we'll fast forward through the Labrynth player's turn, and we'll fast forward a little bit through my turn as well, because unfortunately, it's more of his turn at the moment, so he's just about to just activate a whole bunch of card effects. Summoning out the hand ripping a card out of my hands. Thankfully it wasn't that impactful the card he hit. It's a little bit annoying, but we'll still live. Alright, before finally allowing me to play the game, but only after first grabbing a hold of a goddamn full force virus. He saw me search for a monster with less than 1500 defense, so he decided to nuke all these cards out of my hand. Now, I'm not sure why he didn't search for the virus that gets rid of all the spell cards. I think that would have been a lot more useful, but to be fair, maybe he doesn't know what the art type does, or hasn't seen these before, or maybe he doesn't even run that card, but either way, he activated this, it was kind of cringe, and now I have to win with just these 3 cards. Alright, Hidden Armory, gonna be sending a card on top of my deck to the graveyard to search for my Fire Dance. Fire Dance can revive a Mikanko from the graveyard. Or Mikanko. I need to stop saying Mikado. Alright, Hidden Armory, sending a card to the graveyard, searching for my Mayo. Activating Mayo, targeting my own monster, using my reflections to take control of his monster, and making him take a bunch of damage by swinging in. And bouncing the back row. Alright, so keep in mind, this card is currently untargetable and indestructible thanks to its own effect making things untargetable, and also makes this card over here, makes your card unable to be destroyed by card effects, so this card is really hard to kind of deal with. Alright, so he's going to do a bunch of labyrinthy kind of stuff. Of course, bounce his own monster because he wasn't able to target this one. Going into a Sprite Elf, then Sprite Elf reviving a level 2, and using those 2 monsters to go into a Gigantic. Obviously, trying to go for a Zeus line, because obviously this card is not protected from Zeus's removal, since it's only protected from destruction and targeting effects, and Zeus would actually deal with it. So, makes his 3000 attack monster, attempts to swing in. I activate my Rivalry, which can equip an equip spell from my deck straight to one of my opponent's monsters, equipping a double-edged sword, making this thing have 5000 attack, and he has 5100 life points, so yeah, bye-bye. Absolutely stomped. Alright, let's get into the next replay. Next up, we have one of the strongest decks just introduced into Master Duel. I'm of course talking about Purrely, something that I just did a video on only yesterday, and surprisingly, this deck has a fairly decent matchup into, because their entire game plan is just summoning a gigantic boss monster that's immune to all card effects. And we are playing the one out to that giant monster, the Kaijus, so fairly decent matchup this one. So we'll let our guy go and do all his stuff. Takes him quite a while to do his big setup. Eventually ending on like a 7 or 8 material big boss monster, draws a whole bunch of cards. We'll let him get to it. He's plump, using his dude to summon his other dude, looking at the top 3, grabbing another card. This guy had a pretty bang opening hand actually. Got absolutely everything he kind of needed. Right, even has the luxury of going into a Sylvan for an extra draw. Alright, before finally going into his Noya, how do you pronounce that card? Nor? And passing it over. Alright, so first thing I want to do is make sure to, I have to use the pot of Extravagance because obviously you have to use that at the start of your main phase. Once I've used that, the first thing I want to do is try to get rid of this card on the field, because if I don't get rid of this, as soon as I remove this monster, he's going to get a whole bunch of resources back from the graveyard, so first thing we'll do is we'll Lightning Storm, all that stuff. It also draw an Ash Blossom, which means this card got wrecked. It doesn't particularly matter because we have all we need in hand anyway. Alright, now I can use my Kaiju, removing his boss. Using my Ohime, searching for my Quick Play spell. Quick Play spell can special summon this card without ignoring its summoning conditions. Hidden Armory can then send to the graveyard, searching for my water. Water can then target his Sylvan, returning the Sylvan back to the deck, then search out my Hared, or Hari, how you pronounce this card. Alright, banishing my cards, then send that card to the graveyard, so I can then use my Fire Dance to resurrect, and those 3 monsters on field, all being 0 attack, can all swing into that card with 3k, being 3, 6, 9, and he is 100% just dead on field. Next up, we have another really toxic deck I think a lot of you guys are going to enjoy watching me kick the shit out of, and that is of course going to be Runick. So let's get into it. So this deck has a fairly favourable matchup-ish into Runick Victoria, depending on what the end field is. If you just ended on a copy of just the Nat Beast, if I don't draw a Kaiju, that's really hard to play through because I need my spell cards. But thankfully, he summons 2 monsters, I've got a Lava Golem, so not too hard to deal with. And then once you got this thing on the field, if you get this thing on the field, all your dudes is immune to targeting effects, so all those spell cards that he draws from his Runicks are completely dead, because they're all targeting, so they cannot actually deal with this card. Alright, or any of the other Mikankos he summoned out afterwards. Alright, let's get his field spell, there's a bunch more draw. He does all his annoying stuff, and the only things we really care about are going to be the hand traps. Alright, and of course he has Maxx as well, because of course he does. As if that field wasn't enough, but we Lava Golem him, so kinda good to go. Alright, gonna be searching for, of course, the Quick Play spell, and discarding the card we can revive with the fire. Alright, using Fire Dance to revive the monster. If he was able to deal with this, that would have been kind of annoying, but thankfully he didn't have the Quick Play spell to pop this, or even if he did, he decided not to use it. But it's untargetable now, so it doesn't matter anyway. Alright, Quick Play spell, summoning out the Ohime from hand. And this thing, keep in mind, this thing makes all your Mikankos unaffected or untargetable, so this thing's also immune to all the Runick cards. These cards are also immune to the Runick cards, because it doesn't just make your monsters, it makes all your cards unaffected or untargetable. So all these dudes are completely untargetable, and none of these cards are activatable. Or none of the ones that are trying to actually remove my monsters. Alright, so I'm going to activate my Mikanko Water, making sure to bounce his monster to summon out a card of a different type. Making sure not to bounce the Lava Golem, of course, we need that on field, and not to bounce this card because I don't want him to have more access to more Runick monsters in case he wants to summon more. Alright, and with just these 3 monsters on field, we actually just have lethal damage. I'm going to swing in, this is going to trigger my Mayo, which can remove his field spell to guarantee we have lethal. He has nothing he can do, and he is just dead on field. Alright, let's get into the final replay. Alright, so this replay I decided to save one that was a little bit more of a brickier sort of a hand and sort of shows a little bit different of a playstyle compared to the other ones. So hopefully you enjoy this one as well. But it's a little bit different to the other ones because that's sort of the goal. I didn't want to show off just the straight up just OTK lines because this deck can do other stuff besides just OTKing. It does have a little bit of a control playstyle you can go for as well. So if you go first with this deck list, it's not the end of the world. You can still set up some sort of interruption. Alright. So first thing we're doing, Lava Golemming his 2 negates. Of course we had Maxx, which was very lucky to stop him going into an insane infield. So now we can just use our water, bouncing back our Lava Golem, which is really cool because you can actually do this with things like Kaijus as well to then reuse the Kaijus on following turns. Unfortunately, we can't really do a whole lot else because it was a fairly bricky hand. We've got 2 fire monster dudes in hand, which you don't really want to see, especially with Lava Golems because they stop you using your normal summon. So I'm just going to have to pass on my Rivalry and just, yeah, pass the turn. An untargetable, indestructible monster, and a Rivalry, which can target his monster, equip it with a copy of Reflection, which yoinks his monster and takes control of it, which of course against Sprite is pretty goddamn good because he can't summon any more level 2s from hand like he might have planned to. Alright, starting my sword. Sword's gonna grab the Fire Dance. Fire Dance now can revive a monster from his graveyard. Unfortunately, he negates it. Lucky for us, he negates the activation, meaning we can actually still reuse this card if we can just add it back again. Which your Rivalry can actually do so, banishing it, adding it back to hand. Alright, using the Fire Dance, summoning out the card from hand, yoinking his card from graveyard, and then proceeding to miss lethal because we chose the one that didn't have 1900. If I chose this card, we actually had lethal, so... Alright. So just ignore the fact that I missed lethal here, my math was completely awful. I'm going to use the 2 monsters on field to make an IP Masquerena. Reviving his final monster, and now we have of course a Knightmare Unicorn set up here of a Masquerena and your sword to remove anything he tries to summon. I could also go into something like a Maxx or anything like that as well if I wanted to make an untargetable, indestructible monster. All that kind of stuff is still available to me. And of course we still have the the untargetable monster on field, so it's still fairly hard for him to win the game. So if he does get full setup, we've returned the Lava Golem to hand, we can use it again and burn him for whatever amount of damage, so he's pretty doomed. Yeah, I think he just concedes here. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's replays. Hope you guys enjoyed them. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, hope to see you guys in the next one. Laters.
Hey, big brother, can I watch SpongeBob?
Shut up, Mokuba. I'm busy flagging YouTube videos to compensate for the fact that I have an extremely small penis.
Oh.